I was banned by chess.com. I was playing a Title Tuesday. Everything seemed to be going fine. I was getting wins, I was getting W's, I was beating GMs, I was unleashing spicy bird novelties, and lo and behold, after I played this game you're about to see, they issued me a fair play check requiring that I had to do several Title Tuesdays through Zoom. Can you believe it? They thought that I was cheating because of this really spicy novelty. So let's get into the game. Who was my opponent here? My opponent was Caden Trough, very famous player. This was one of America's former rising juniors and rising prodigies. A lot of people had put him on track to be part of the 2700 club, but I believe he started refocusing his career around the age of 20, and so for that purpose, he was always a strong GM, but he never made it that far. I think his peak FIDE was like 2550. Regardless though, this is a very strong player we're talking about. So the game starts off with the bird, f4, knight h6, knight f3, g6, d3, d5, and for those of you who don't know, for those of you who are maybe of the 2 or 3 people that don't already know this information, I am doing a course on the bird opening. That's with this f4 move here where I dig the eagle's claws into e5. And for that purpose, I have been studying enormous amounts of chess and analyzing enormous amounts of variation in these very strange, wacky positions. You'll notice my opponent has played something weird. This is called the horsefly defense. I don't know why it's called the horsefly defense. I guess birds hate horseflies. But regardless, it makes a lot of sense. The knight is going to come to f5. They want to play d4 and drill into this e3 square. So this is what a lot of GMs have been doing against me. And I knew I needed to come up with a weapon against it, and especially because I wanted to make this bird course fantastic, I had to look into it. So I found this beautiful novelty here. A lot of people try e4 in this position, other people try g3 or e3. I played a novelty here, and I think this is what got me banned. Queen d2. It's a really beautiful idea. I want to play e4, but the problem is that after takes, they're going to trade queens, and I don't want to uncastle my king. I want my king to castle. I want my king to shine in the moonlight. So instead, queen d2. And the whole idea now is I'm going to play e4 and we're just going to trade queens. I can recapture with my knight and be a very happy camper. My opponent plays bishop g7, I play e4, and already he slips up here. He's supposed to play something like c5 or knight c6, and the game is just dead equal with a very strange position at that. Instead he takes. I take back, we trade queens, and already after castles, I should be much better if I just lock this knight out. All I needed to do here was play h3. The knight would have been put into prison, and he has no real way to get out here. If he plays something like f5, his hope is to get the knight out this way. I'm just going to play e5. Sure, the knight's going to f7, but at the end of the day, look at these bad pieces. The bishop is bad, the knight is bad. They're both pointed into this concrete. Not to mention, he's just locked off his own bishop from ever being able to use that diagonal. That's a real, I was going to say W, but it's not a W, it's an L. That's a big L for the black pieces. So I should have played h3. Lo and behold, though, I just didn't know the system. I had known a bit about these different positions here, but in general, though, I'm sort of like a blind man, just perusing the wilderness, just trying to find a place for shelter. The bird is such a weird opening. The bird is just a completely uncharted forest. It's completely uncharted terrain. No one knows any of these systems. Literally, I'm not sure if queen d2 is a complete novelty. If it's not an absolute novelty, my editor is going to put it in the notes whether or not it's an actual novelty. I'm certain if it is not a novelty, it's only been played in like 2 games ever online and in person. And so it is effectively a novelty because it's just so unknown. The idea of it is really beautiful though. It's stunning. And this must have been the move that got me banned because already like I was sort of on their hit list. I'm only at 2640 and I'm beating up on 2800s. But, you know, when I'm playing this, and if you see here, I played this move in literally not even a second. I guess this is with 1 second increments, so I was playing it in 1 second. But regardless, if you want to really get on chess.com's bad side, if you want to get on their watch list, play supercomputer novelties in less than 1 second. That's going to get you some attention for sure. So bishop g7, let's get back to the position. Castles, I played c3 here. I wanted to stump this bishop on g7. I wanted it to be pointed into concrete. Knight g4, my opponent finally gets his knight out. Knight c4, knight d7, h3, I'm pushing that rascal around. The knight finally got to a decent position though. This might not be perfect, but it's way better than h6. So toward that end, I definitely already made a mistake by doing this. e5, knight e4, I'm chasing him around. Knight ec5, bishop c2. I wanted to briefly mention that throughout these moves, both of us have been making several mistakes here. Am I just talking about how we're both really bad players? Well, no, that's not my point at all. We're both Grandmasters. I'm a Grandmaster. This is also a really strong Grandmaster. My point behind mentioning this is that the bird is just such an unorthodox world. It's a world in which the normal rules of chess just don't really apply. And that's why I think it's so poisonous and so venomous, because you're going to get opponents who think that they're big shots. They're going to have studied a lot of chess, but if they haven't studied the bird, if they haven't studied these specific positions, they're going to just completely fall in the quicksand. So already here I think white is worse if black plays knight dc5, but instead my opponent made a mistake. He played knight ec5. I dropped my bishop back, and now white is back to being better. I do have this nice pawn chain after all. a5, bishop e3, b5. My opponent's pushing my knight around. Knight a3, b4, and my knight hops in to b5. c6, knight d4. I got a lot of pressure here. Look, there's a pressure on c6. I have this x-ray here, so if that knight ever moves, there could be really big problems with that. My opponent plays bishop b7. He's reinforcing that pawn on c6. I played king f2, rook fc8. And in this position, I remember analyzing this with the computer. It was saying that I should play c4 here. The idea is that after a4, I'm just going to play b3. I have a really nice, pure form of concrete here. This bishop is never going to be good. If this bishop wants to get out eventually through this, they're going to need to push c5 and allow my knight into the really nice b5 square. So all in all, there are just too many problems here for black. White has an enormous advantage, believe it or not. White is already +1, I think, if we turn on the computer. Alright, my Chess.com computer is always messing up. But regardless, we have a lot of pressure here. We're going to be able to play rook d1. We can advance these pawns forward at the right time. We do need to be a little careful, though. Of course, we don't want to let them chop on this. But apart from that, if this knight starts moving around, we could definitely play g4 and f5. e6, the saboteur move, just to completely disrupt their structure, is also on the cards. And yeah, just going back to my main point, right? The whole idea here is that this, in other positions, in more standard positions, finding a way to just solidify the advantage with a pawn move like this would be just second nature to a grandmaster. But the thing is that these structures are just so foreign, they're so different, that logical moves like this don't really get picked up on grandmaster's radar. It's too weird a position. Like, looking at this move in the analysis, it definitely made sense to me. But even now, I still need to think about it. It's not obvious. And the reason it's not obvious is because these structures are like no other in open chess games, pretty much. And I don't know why I just said open chess games, but pretty much like King's Indian, Queen's Indian, all normal openings, king pawn, queen pawn, you're not going to get structures exactly like this. Maybe only in the Dutch, which f4 is sort of a reversed form of. So knight a6, knight b3. He's bringing his knight around. He wants to play c5. I'm attacking that pawn there. Takes, bishop takes, knight b4, bishop e4, knight d5. I play rook d1. He plays a4. And at this point now, I made a bit of a mistake here. Knight a5. I was too full of the vinegar. I'm attacking this. I'm attacking this. I thought that this was a good position. The flip side, though, is my knight is almost trapped here, and this is a very flimsy type of defense. He took, I took, and everything is still barely protecting each other. My knight is hanging here, but his knight is also hanging. He hit me with a thunderbolt. This was a real problem. I was hoping he would take, and I would take here. He does have the bishop pair, but after all, this is in jail. These pawns are complete concrete. That bishop on g7 is dead. Finito. We can just forget about it. It's going to sleep with the fishes. Instead, though, he plays knight c5. Complete thunderbolt from the blue here. I take on b7, he takes on e4, and, while it's been piece for piece, this is not a good knight. This is not at all a good knight. This knight has no necessary recourse to get back. It's going to be a very uncomfortable position. My knight is weak. I also am dropping a pawn immediately. I played king e3 and he took a pawn. In this position now, he is objectively winning. But just as the bird is a hard... What is the phrase I'm thinking of? Just as the bird is a hard animal to catch, just as the eagle flies high, just as the eagle flies high and is hard to catch, so with the white pieces, even after you've made many mistakes, is it hard to lose with the bird. Rook d7. I'm drilling in. My whole idea now, I'm just banking on this knight here. It's really a hit or miss piece. It could definitely get trapped, but at the same time, it is covering a lot of important squares, so maybe we can make this work here. Knight check, king e4. I gotta defend this f4 pawn after all. He plays bishop g7. Another problem I really had here was that if they play f5, what am I gonna do? If I take, he takes with the knight. En passant isn't a good move here. You gotta remember, en passant is not always a good move. My students always come to me about that, and it's just something you gotta keep in mind. Do not play en passant all the time. So instead my opponent plays bishop f8. Knight d2. My knight is rerouting around. I need to bring extra aid to get this knight out. We're going to have to airlift this knight out with something like knight c4 and knight a5. Rook b8. In this position, this was the one in which the computer was pointing out that rook a7 is just hopeless for me. This pin is just going to be way too much to bear. Perhaps I could play knight c5, but there should be some other problems here. Yeah, takes, rook d8. And the problem is that wherever my knight goes, knight c3 check is going to create huge problems with this knight here. Yeah, this ain't good. This ain't it, guys. Another thing as well, so yeah, check, king e3 could be maybe saving everything, but instead just taking on f4, king takes. He could throw in a little skewer if he wants, but regardless, he's going to be up 2 pawns, and I'm going to have several weaknesses on e, on g, on a. This is completely hopeless. So instead, though, fortunately, my opponent didn't see this. Instead, he played rook a b8. I played knight c4, rook c7. We get a trade, and I'm still down a pawn. I never got that pawn back from c3, but at the same time, knight ca5, I really want to hunt that c pawn down. e6, I'd love to take, but I can't yet. The knight would be hanging. Rook c1, c5. And in this position, I still really wanted to take, but there are always going to be so many problems here. Here he'd play something like rook b5, and my knights are just completely stuck here. This is not the type of position you want. In this position, when you have a knight defending a knight, that literally means that both of them are completely frozen here. You do not want something like this. This is fool's gold of the highest order. It's going to be a really, really painful game because I'm just going to be playing down the 2 knights. I can't use either of them for anything. So instead, I didn't take. I just kept calm and carried on. Rook c4, attacking this pawn on a4. Knight d5, king f3. I want to take the pawn, but I'm a grandmaster, so I see the fork. No fork today, mister. Instead, king f3. He plays knight b6. I bring my rook back. Now, with his rook blocked from coming to b5, I could start thinking about taking this pawn. If he plans on hitting me with the pin, I can just play knight d3. And it looks like I survived. Maybe I'm still slightly uncomfortable, but keep in mind I should have been dead lost, right? I was down a pawn with that knight on b7. But time is ticking. Time is getting slow. Time is getting very low here. Look at what's happening with that clock for him. 16 seconds on the clock, guys. 16 seconds. This is a very hard position to play. One of the things I really love about the bird is that, you know, when you're playing the bird, the structure is so irrational. I know I've said that several times. I'm going to say it once again, though. The structure is very irrational and unorthodox. And not only does that mean your opponent is going to be befuddled and completely out of his element, but it also means that they're going to be eating a lot of time trying to figure out basic things. And all in all, that combines, that conglomerates to form a fantastic practical advantage if you do choose to play the bird. So my opponent plays knight d5. I play rook c4. I'm going back. I want that pawn, baby. Knight b4, a3, knight d5, and I finally get snacking. Rook takes a4. My opponent has had to decide on all these things with just around 15 seconds here. It's really getting tough for him. Rook e4, rook c8, knight d6, rook a8, knight c4. At this point, I thought I was better. It turns out here that according to the computer, I'm slightly better here. I thought that, you know, my opponent would just trade on c4. I would get a fantastic knight. His bishop is really bad, points in this pawn. And there's so many endgames you can see here where just once we trade the rooks off, this pawn just runs extremely fast, like a lightning bolt. And it just wins the game. Unfortunately, though, with the rooks on the board, there's still almost no winning chances for me. I think there's like a slight edge here. Certainly someone like Magnus, some very strong pragmatic player, would be able to squeeze water from a stone here, but in general, it's not that good. It's okay. Anyway, though, my opponent knew what I wanted. He knew I wanted the golden knight on c4, and he just denied it. He played knight d5. Now my knights are still stuck defending one another. I played g3, reinforcing the f4 pawn. Might as well use the time to do something. Bishop e7. And I got more problems here. Look at this. The bishop's coming to d8. Literally, these knights' problems never end. Rook e1. I'm trying to fix my rook. I want to get my rook to b1 and maybe over to b7 to start grazing on the c pawn and the other weaknesses in the king side. Bishop d8. And here I make another mistake. I played knight c6. I had to play knight b7. It was critical to attack the bishop and attack the c pawn at the same time. I play knight c6. He plays bishop c7. All of a sudden, I'm dead lost again. But The joke ends up being on him because look at his time. His time is getting lower and lower. At some point, even if my position is just horrendous, if he only has 5 seconds, he's never going to be able to use it. Like, I'll let you guys in on a little secret. If you only have 5 seconds, you're never going to be able to think about anything. So what I tell my students often is, I guess this is more appropriate to classical games, but just in general, literally, if you have a time advantage to the point where you're able to think somewhat congruently and somewhat coherently, while your opponent has to rush out just moves immediately and erratically. What is the word I'm looking for? He has to rush out moves impulsively to not lose on time. You can more or less count that as like a +1 advantage. So if we go by this metric here, at the moment I think it's -2 for him. He's completely winning. So in reality, if we use that metric and take off 1 for him, it should be better, but it shouldn't be lost yet. I played rook b1. I think in hindsight I should have just played rook d1. The idea here is that if he tries to trap my knight, I can take, and I'm going to check and get some golden knights. What are the squares for that? Yeah, there are the squares. King f8, knight d5. My knights are perfect here, juxtaposed by this pawn on the dark squares. This bishop is a target. I would actually love to see the evaluation here, but of course chess.com isn't working. I mean, the chess.com engine for me is not working. Chess.com, I love chess.com, big friend of the show. So knight c6, bishop c7, rook b1, rook a4, and I am in the deep doo-doo. I am in a lot of problems here. Look at this. That knight is hanging there. What am I going to do though? If I move my knight, I'm losing the pawn. I played knight d6. I was really feeling full of the vinegar here. Notice I can't target this bishop because it's just reinforced by the knight. He's attacking my knights, which are super weak, but I can't attack anything of his. It's just not fair. Knight d6, he takes, he gets a pawn, king f2, but the time is still ticking. He's had to play all of these moves with less than 10 seconds. So the time is starting to be a factor on him. Of course, in this position, I'm down a pawn. My knights are starting to look active, but at the same time, they still aren't able to really zoom in and focus on anything imminently with any sort of real serious pressure. And for that purpose, I should just be dead lost here. If he had more time, I would definitely be losing. But all the same, the bird has achieved its purpose of getting his time super low by confronting him with this completely new foreign type of position, in which there are pawns on f4, pawns on e5, pawns on c6. Plays knight c3. He wants to play knight e4. I play rook e1. I'm stopping that trek. Rook a2. I play king f3. Knight d5. My knight comes here. My knight's rolling around the carousel, as they say. I really want to get some tricks going. He plays c4. I take. He takes. Still completely lost, and now I'm down on time, but his time is even lower. He has 4 seconds. I have 10 seconds. At this point, I'm not really sure what that metric I discussed adds to this to this game. I'm definitely like completely lost here. Probably it's -2 still. If I only have 11 seconds, I also don't have any time to think. So we can't really use that metric anymore of, you know, a big time advantage equates to +1 in the position. Rook c1, check. King f2, c3. Boy, oh boy, I'm in trouble here. There's not even any hope to get back that pawn. I play knight b4. I'm just trying to stop him from playing knight d5. If he plays knight d5 here, I can take and get snacking with king e3, king d4. At that point, that should be a draw. Something like king e3, c2, king d4, takes. I take here, he takes, I take. This should definitely be a draw, though. It is going to be still a bit tricky. Something like rook h4. I'm going to need to be really careful here. If I play rook c4, g5 wins for him because takes, and he's going to snatch this pawn way too soon. That's definitely a losing position. Yeah, king g7, king d5, king g6, king e4. I'm not in time to defend this. One more move and I would be fine. So here in this position, my opponent does not go knight d5 though. He plays rook b3. He's just pushing me around. Knight c2, knight d5. I just keep waiting out the clock. I'm just hoping for that clock to hit 0. 3.6, we're getting very, very close. Rook b2, king e4. Just continuing to wait around. h4. I really like this move. This is a classic element of Grandmaster technique. I know I say that from a completely losing position, but at the same time, it is really Grandmaster technique. You want to just set your position up so that when they do eventually break through, which you know is going to happen at some point, you have a minimal amount of weaknesses. Before, when this pawn was here, I had 2 pawns that were going to be loose. Now I only have 1 pawn. That's 1 less than 2. Knight e7, king d3, I'm coming to hunt down the pawn. He wants to start grazing on g3. Here I played rook g1, and lo and behold, he was at 1.7 before this move. My opponent flags. So this was a real shocker. I was super happy to be able to win this game with this bird novelty that I'd prepared at home in home analysis for the bird course. But at the same time, it would have been nicer if I had just, converted very cleanly and I had used the multiple +1 advantages I had gotten to just win the game rather than get a losing position and flag my opponent. But as those who watch this channel often know, dirty flags are definitely not something that I'm going to decline or not take credit for. You got to win any game you can. It's the way of the world. It's the way it works. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly enjoyed discussing it. And I'll see you for the next one. Thanks for watching.